Morning, everybody. My name is Alex Onufri, Managing Director of Evolve at Interquest, and I'm joined today by Amit Patel, seasoned talent acquisition leader and runner of large recruitment programs globally, both on the permanent side and on the contingent side of recruitment. And we're going to talk today a little bit around using contingent workforce as your fourth pillar of talent. And I think from my perspective, I can just sort of start, Amit, is really just to understand, why do organisations first and foremost need a contingent workforce?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Alex. I mean, in terms of how organisations, I guess, organise, compartmentalise their talent acquisition functions, there has always been this traditional bias towards lateral hiring, exec hiring, or the hiring of graduates or your early careers. And the contingent workers often get forgotten about. But what you need to realise now is that there are more and more interim specialists out there in the marketplace. There's more and more opportunities where people are looking to hire interim specialists as opposed to your more traditional permanent FTEs. So, creating that connectivity where this workforce can become a pillar of talent rather than just a reactive resource that you turn to when you need it, is absolutely essential. There's a lot of talk in the marketplace at the minute around the move towards skills-based hiring. If you were hiring for a traditional permanent employee, you might take them through various assessments, assessing them how they're going to fit into the organisation. Whereas more traditionally for contingent workers, you assess for their ability to do a job and hit the ground running. That essentially is skills-based hiring. So if you think about, utilising those more and getting into that mindset of understanding, I need a job done, who's got the skills to be able to do that job, you're already kind of on that journey. Yeah. And then, there's also this concept, and it's been more and more prominent since the COVID times, but this hybrid working principle is here to stay. A lot of people are kind of embracing that as organisations, and the more that people utilise contingent workers, particularly those where, you're utilising deliverables or fixed outcome based projects, you are sending work to people rather than sending people to work. And all of those are concepts around that sort of contingent workforce, which people have to get comfortable with and familiarise.
Mm-hmm. And you've worked in large technology businesses, large financial institutions. What have been some of the drivers for change and some of the reasons that you've moved to a contingent workforce?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, you've got your typical or your traditional reasons around cost, compliance, quality of data, or whatever it may be. But there are other factors that we've had to consider. So if I think about things like headcount and how headcount is classified, right? So a lot of analysts look at large organizations and they'll look at how many employees that organization has and what their revenue has been. And they come up with a very, rudimentary productivity statistic. And that's how they measure the performance of a company, or use one of those as a measure of a performance of a company. If I am very heavy in terms of permanent employees, that is going to bring my productivity down. So a lot of times organizations are looking not only just the way they report these types of workers, but actually looking to flex up this workforce so they can actually be seen as more productive because they've got a more transient group of people there that are rolling on and rolling off as work is required. I think the other big thing, I've faced this problem before where we've simply not had the premises to house people to do this type of work. So partnering with, consulting firms, the MSP type organizations where they have their own premises where, we can utilize to get the work done, but similarly not have to put people up in our offices is a huge benefit, from a cost perspective. But also these consulting and third-party firms often have a network of these offshore centres. So work gets passed around the world, so it doesn't actually stop. So it's almost like a follow the sun type approach that they utilise. And then, by partnering with third parties, they are genuinely experts in their field if you partner with the right organisations. So you can either gain or maintain competitive advantages that your organisations are building up.
I mean, in your experience, can these be run internally?
Absolutely, they can be. I guess it comes down to, a big factor will come down to size and scale. right?
Yeah.
So, if you've got something which is relatively small and localized to a specific geographic location, then it can make it easier. I find that the challenges arise when the scale increases. It's a very transient workforce with people constantly coming and going if you're doing it correctly. And with that comes the administration associated with onboarding, offboarding people, paying people in a timely manner, depending which location you're operating in. There could be certain regulations around how frequently or how quickly you have to pay people. If you're taking that administrative burden onto your own organisation's responsibilities, it's going to add a lot in terms of sort of resource and cost impact as well. And then you've got changes in things like labour laws as well, which you've got to constantly stay on top of. Whereas if I'm partnering with a third party who can bring me that intelligence and actually provide me with guidance to make sure that I've got the controls in place rather than having to do the whole thing, it makes it a lot more feasible, and actually it makes it so that the experts are advising me in what they do as well. So I think as the size and scale of your strategy grows, partnering with a third party, either through an MSP or a panel of third party firms, is probably a more appropriate way forward.
And in your experience, there's challenges associated with shifting from purely focusing on sort of permanent talent to thinking more holistically across a total talent type mentality. What are the kinds of challenges that you've come across trying to deploy a program like that into a large organization?
Yeah, I mean, that list could go on, but I think one of the biggest challenges that is probably around the classification of workers. There aren't many organisations out there who have got everything compartmentalised perfectly. There's generally a lot of misclassification that happens, not intentionally, but it just does as part of people being sort of onboarded. So the way in which workers are classified, but also I've been surprised at the lack of a structured taxonomy around workers in a number of organisations as well, in terms of how do we class people, what should be the type of worker that we use when we use those workers as well. So that's been a huge issue and a huge challenge. I think if we talk about sort of large scaled programs across multi-geographic locations, the use of a vendor management system or equivalent is absolutely essential. I mean, you can't do it from sort of spreadsheets. And what I found in situations is that the way in which that vendor management system or VMS is rolled out or configured, it's not always optimal, and therefore the use of that system is inconsistent. And therefore what you then have is, if people aren't using the system in a consistent manner, the data and the outputs that you get from it have all sorts of errors and discrepancies in them as well. And if you're trying to use that information to base decisions on whether it is, to flex workers up or down, or, introduce new rate cards or whatever it may be, it becomes a lot more challenging to do so.
Yeah, and it's not an insignificant investment as well financially. So you've got to get it to work.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah.
But I would say one of the biggest challenges I've come across is that business mindset. So, the contingent workforce program is there working in service of your business stakeholders. We mustn't lose sight of that. And regardless of which business area you're using, what I've tended to find is that a lot of areas will have their preferred ways of working, their preferred, partners that they work with as well. And changing that business mindset can be very, very challenging. There is, this concept of, well, a contingent worker is not going to provide me with the quality or the longevity that I need, or, I'm happy to use contingent workers for processing or transactional tasks, but not for the specialist work, if you like. So there's a bit of that. And I've found, unfortunately, that there are times when business and personal objectives get in the way of, working towards an overall business strategy.
Right.
So, it's about educating and helping them understand that actually this is a very viable and essential part of our talent solution that we should be nurturing and progressing.
And in your experience, because I think you're absolutely right, I think that tends to be the biggest blocker to organisations thinking more holistically about their talent. How have you been able to change that mindset? What sort of conversations have you had with business leaders? How have you kind of you talked about education? How have you educated?
Well, I think the main one is for you're talking to the right people at the right levels within the organisation, but provide them with accountability and accessibility. And in many organisations I've worked in, there's been almost an overlap between who owns contingent workers. Is it someone sitting in HR or talent acquisition, or does it sit within procurement? And there's not always been that accountable person or accountable exec. So I think that's absolutely critical for any successful program. I think you have to set challenging objectives. I mean, if you come in and say, I'm just going to do exactly what you do, but do it in a slightly more efficient manner, there's no carrot there. There's nothing for them to kind of say, right, okay, I'm going to partner with you on this. You've got to show them what a real benefit is going to look like, aligned to their departmental, functional, business strategy. So you do have to set challenging objectives, stretch objectives for the program and for yourself. But it's really important that you measure those regularly with the business. So have them involved in conversations, or a representative involved regularly to say, look, this is how we're performing. And in doing so, have them involved in, creating some of that program. So that co-creation aspect, and what that looks like. So I've been in situations where I've had business leaders involved in, right, okay, so we're going to be expanding or setting up a contingent workforce. Talk to me about the process. What works? What doesn't work? Can we tailor this so that we can fit it more around what's going to be beneficial to you? So process aspects, but also things like supplier selection. Very often contingent workforce programs, either led through talent acquisition functions or through procurement, will come in and say, right, here's a selection of a panel of suppliers that we're going to use because they fit the right profile, they have the right rates, and they said they can do a job for us. But are they the right suppliers, the right vendors that we should be working with? If I look at a technology function, for example, those technologists working in the business will know who the best service providers are. They will know who the best agencies, for example, are if they're looking for contract resources, because they're the ones that will be contacting them about roles as well. So having them involved in some of that decision making is really, really important. Making that case with data as well. So don't leave it ambiguous. Give them hard facts that they can work to, whether it is around spend metrics, quality metrics, performance metrics, time metrics, whatever it may be. But use data that you have available, and then showcase to them the benefits around the technology as well. So we spoke about the VMS earlier on. Yes, it's costly, but actually if it's configured correctly and used correctly, automating processes is a huge advantage, because you can reduce costs, you can reduce risk, you can reduce time. And I've been in situations where we've actually taken our VMS and we've integrated it with other internal systems. So, I used to have a team in one of my organizations that used to pull timesheet metrics from our VMS and then manually go and code them into which projects those costs should be assigned to. And then it would be uploaded into another system with the same information. I mean, we just integrated the two for them. So, right, okay, you've got one tool here where you can kind of pull information from. And I think overall, the user experience as well, for suppliers, for stakeholders, for the workers as well, because people have a choice. People have a choice whether they want to work with you, people have a choice whether they want to partner with you. And, if from a business perspective, they're not getting the levels of service or the experience they want, they will find a way to actually make a case to use something else. So, I think those are probably the main points,
ones.
Really. Yeah.
And I can imagine that cultural shift change doesn't happen overnight. That clearly is going to take time. However, some of the benefits and the results that you can see as a result of some of these kind of movement towards engaging contingent workforce and thinking about them in terms of your talent approach can be quite quick, almost from day one in some cases.
Yeah.
You can see some. Can you just give some examples in your experiences, some of the organisations that you've worked in, the sorts of results that kind of come out of engaging contingent workers in the right way?
Yeah, I think one of the main ones has been a better connectivity between other HR teams. So whether I've been sat in a position where the contingent workforce is being managed by a procurement team or an HR team, there still needs to be that real, clear, cohesive partnership between HR, procurement, and business, right? And I think where I've seen it done well, talent acquisition teams, HR business partners have actually gone into, leadership team meetings where they sit around the table for when they're talking about, talent strategies and said, have we thought about utilizing contingent workers here? Have we thought about actually this is not something where a project is going to run for an indefinite period of time? We should have people on a fixed period. Why don't we think about actually, rather than hiring people in location, using some offshore services through some of our vendor partners to deliver this piece of work, if you like. So I think that's been really, really critical.
And what are some of the other results that you've seen in your experience, Amit?
Yeah, so I think the other thing is around expenditure. So in an HR team, for example, you'll find that if a contingent workforce is accountable within HR, that will be likely one of the biggest areas of expenditure. It's not HR expenditure, but it's expenditure that HR are responsible for and accountable for.
Yeah.
And it's always got a huge spotlight on it, particularly from procurement partners and teams that are looking at sort of the cost aspects. I think it's important to recognise actually it's okay to increase this spend. And I know that may sound a bit silly, but actually, if you're thinking about having some sort of managed program where you've got either an MSP or a panel of consulting partners or vendors that you're using on a global basis, if you are using these people on a ad hoc or more sporadic basis, on more individual basis, if you like, at variable rates and variable outcomes, you're going to be paying a higher price rather than actually bundling and consolidating this work through a managed channel.
Yeah.
And that spend, as I say, may go up, but it also means that spend is going to come down by a larger increment somewhere else for the organization. So you do have to look at these things more holistically. And I think the other thing that I would say is that in order to make any sort of strategy or program successful, one of the things that I've always worked hard to do is have minimal variations. So there is always going to be requirements for some variations, but as these programs grow in scale, geographic location, the more variations you have, the more difficult it becomes to manage, the more difficult it becomes to sort of report on, the more difficult it becomes to kind of, evolve that program as well, because you're kind of tied to a particular area. So, agreeing variations to get business buy-in is probably not the way forward. It's actually agreeing with the business that actually this blueprint way of working is the right way forward for the organization.
Yeah.
is the best approach.
Can I just take you back to the point around kind of, cost savings and initiatives? Can you talk a little bit around some of the programs that are available to anybody, whether you're running it in-house or as part of an outsourced arrangement, that can help deliver those? Because it's not just simply going with lower margin than markups. There are other ways that you can save money in these sorts of programs of work with contingent workers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if I go back to the point around the misclassification of workers and the taxonomy, a big part of this is using the right workers in the right situations.
Yeah.
The right workers, the right resources for the right types of scenarios. And what I've found is that often what business areas will do is they will tend to defer to the path of least resistance to actually bring someone on board to do a piece of work without considering whether it is the most cost-effective way. And that's not a malicious approach. It's just, I have work to get done. I have objectives to meet. I have a consulting provider, for example, that can do this. And we want to get it done. So having more of a, I guess, gatekeeper type approach to determining what type of workers should be used when, and providing clear guidance to the business that, this is what you should use in which scenario, and being able to provide that consultation advice to businesses is really, really critical. And then, the types of engagement as well. So, more often than not, I will see people that are engaged on, daily rates or weekly rates or monthly rates. I mean, I think if you have a specific piece of work that needs to be done, I think it's really important that, procurement teams and those that are responsible for contingent workforce programs do start driving this concept of fixed price pieces of work or having specific deliverables. And I think what I'm seeing more and more so is that the contingent workforce that is more specialist in nature now, they're more open, they're more amenable to working in those sort of outcomes, because it helps them to actually, apportion their time to actually delivering pieces of work rather than just being present in a location and being, or billing a day's worth of work or whatever. So I think those are sort of aspects that people need to look at. And then there's the more traditional things around, paying people daily versus hourly if you are going down a day rate type approach, and controlling the expenditure that way. And then things like tenure limits. These are all quite dated things that people have used sort of historically,
but equally really important, and actually very, very quick wins in some ways. Things like furloughs and things like that can make big differences.
Completely. And what people don't often realise is that when you look at the contingent workforce expenditure, the majority of that expenditure is worker pay. If you're talking about individuals, put to one side where you're paying consulting firms, but worker pay. So the only way you can actually bring a cost down is actually look at an individual's remuneration. Now, it's a very fine balance, right? Because if you start influencing people's rates of pay, for example, there is a huge risk that you make your organisation uncompetitive versus the market. I mean, the market tends to set the rates for contingent workers because it's what's in demand at the time, what people's skill sets are. And I think it's really important to make sure that we recognise and respect what contingent workers bring in terms of expertise, and don't try and sort of undercut what we should be paying people. But if there are scenarios where the market has shifted and people are on rates or rate cards that are higher than where they need to be, then there may need to be a conversation that needs to be had there as well.
Lovely. Amit, thank you so much for your time this morning. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure,
could have sat here all morning kind of talking about this stuff, but we need to call it a day. Moving forward, we hope to have more of these types of sessions, so look out for them on LinkedIn and other social media. And we'll be running a number of talent sessions, roundtable events over the coming months. So look forward to speaking to you all again soon.